Varda Lieberman. She will interview Dr. Moshe Ashkenazi from Sheba about decision-making under uncertainty. So first we'll begin with Dr. Guy Hochman, who we thank him very much for joining us and for agreeing to come to give this talk. And he is from the School of Psychology at the IDC. And Dr. Hochman, he received his PhD from the Technion, and he was a postdoc at Duke under the supervision of Dan Ariely, who we hosted a couple of weeks ago. And his main research interests are behavioral economics, pro-social, anti-social behavior, and many more. And Guy, I think I'll pass the microphone to you so we can begin.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome everyone, and hello. I want to talk today about behavioral ethics, and I don't want to focus about, philosophical questions, what is considered moral or immoral, things like that. I want to talk about a more practical approach to ethics and to focus on what people actually do. Now, having said that, I want to start with a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, who is a philosopher. And the reason I want to do it, actually I have two reasons. So one reason is because it always, it's very impressive to cite philosophers. It makes you look smart. But also because Nietzsche says something that is very important for our discussion. Now, feel free, if you have any comments, any questions, you can, we'll have time at the end for questions, but if you want to have any comment or question along the way, feel free to just, raise your hand or shout out and ask your question. So what Nietzsche said is, why do almost all people tell the truth in ordinary everyday life? Certainly not because a God has forbidden them to lie. The reason is, firstly, because it is easier. For lying demands invention, dissimulation, and a good memory. So basically what Nietzsche is saying is that most people don't lie and cheat. But also he said it's not because they are moral, they care about the values of morality, is because they understand that in order to be a good liar or a good cheater, you need to have good memory, because you need to remember what you said, what are the stories that you invented. And this is why most people, maybe because they are a little bit lazy, they don't want to lie and cheat too much. Now, I want to show you that this is not really the case. Because as humans, we are faced with a conflict. And the conflict is between a good and a bad. Because on the one side, people care about morality, and they want to be moral and honest, and to preserve a positive moral self. Now, we have some findings that support this idea. For example, when we ask people to rate morality, meta-analysis shows that usually the scores are very high, somewhere around 4.2 out of 5. Also, when we ask people what will make you a different person, what will change your personality completely, and we ask them a lot of things like even sex change operation and many other things, change of profession, change of a lot of the personality traits. The main thing that people say that will change you, that will make you a completely different person, is if you sacrifice your moral values. So this is something that is very important to people. Morality, being honest, they try to maintain a positive moral self, to think themselves as moral, to see themselves as people who are extremely moral. So this is, on the one side, we care about morality very much. On the other side, we as human beings tend to lie and cheat almost every day. And there are several examples. You know what you are doing and how many times in a month or in a week, sometimes in a day, you do things that are not, could be considered completely moral. But in, for example, in experiments, in journal experiments, when people are required to write in a journal what they do every day, they tend to report on average between 1 to 2 lies every day. And also in our experiments, we see that most people cheat. But I have to say that cheating behavior is not to the extreme, meaning that people don't usually cheat to the full extent. We only cheat just a little bit. And we will try to understand today why cheating is limited, and why it's important to understand the factors that influence cheating, and how we can curb down cheating behavior among people. Okay, so why should we even care about small-scale cheating? Because if we cheat just a little bit, maybe it's not so important. So I want to first explain why we feel it's extremely important, because I can agree that if we take every small cheating behavior, it could be insequential. But when many people cheat most times, even for a little bit, it amounts to a huge societal price. So it costs billions and billions of dollars every year because people just cheat a little bit. Also, it chips trust just a little bit, but just a little bit every time. And every day, a small bite and another small bite and another small bite. So it encourages negative social norms, and it creates a reality in which it is okay to cheat and lie. Also, it is a very slippery slope. It's very dangerous because most people start with just a small step, and they just extend the border just a little bit about what is right and wrong in terms of morality. But every time when we get used to cheat a little bit, the boundary becomes the new status quo, the new reference point, and then we extend the border just a little bit. So it's a very slippery slope, and most people start very small. But once we start, like they say, sky is the limit. And one French philosopher once said that it's easier to find someone who never did anything wrong than to find someone who just did something wrong once. And the reason he said it is because once you cross the border, it's a very slippery slope. So what limits our dishonesty, or why most people cheat, but only a little bit? So the main theory we have today suggests that when we are at a crossroad in which we need to decide whether to be honest or dishonest, we experience a psychological tension. This psychological tension is called the ethical dissonance. This is a tension that arises when we understand that we can be moral and maintain a moral self and do the things that we value, or we can cheat and lie in order to maximize our personal gain. And so whenever we face this situation, we experience a psychological tension. This is called ethical dissonance. How with this dissonance we can still lie and cheat, but only a little bit? So we have a tension reduction mechanism called justifications, which are basically good excuses. Whenever I have a good reason, a good excuse why I can cheat and lie and do things that are okay and doesn't make me an immoral person, I allow myself to lie and cheat and to behave immorally. We call it justifications. And these justifications help us to redefine the boundaries and extend what is honest and what is not honest in our everyday life. Now, just let me give you one example. So if I go to the office and my kid calls me and he says, listen, I need to print something for school. So most people will say it's probably okay to take some pages home from the office because I don't have pages at home to print the paper for my kid, because I can convince myself that I will use most of these pages to print things that I need for work. But it's not okay. So it's easier to justify, but it's not as easy to justify to take the chair, my office chair, home, because even though I'm going to sit and think about work, it's easier to justify taking a pen or to take some pages than to take something that is more expensive and will be less easier to justify as taking because it's okay.
Guy, feel
Yes.
free to answer at the Q&A time if you prefer, but Kobe is asking a relevant question. Who
Okay.
defines the rules, or who defines what cheating is? So maybe you want to address it now or later.
Yeah, okay, so it's a very good question. And basically, who defines what's right and wrong? So there are two ways to look at it. First, there is the philosophical perspective, which is, what is right and what is wrong. I'm not going to talk about this today. I'm focusing on what is, let's say, what is defined by society as following the rules. Basically, when we talk about morality and we talk about honesty and dishonesty, we talk about whether people follow the rules or don't follow the rules. Now, again, we can go into a philosophical debate about what is right and wrong, but this is not the main point. The point here is when people understand what is okay and what is not okay, what is acceptable by society, what is acceptable according to the rules we abide to, and they do things that are not in favor of it or in this direction. So this is basically when I'm talking about dishonesty or immoral behavior, I'm talking about not following the rules that were defined by our government, by our society, by the company. Okay, so I hope this makes things a little bit clear. There are any, okay. So basically this is the main theory that we have today, that whenever we want or whenever we need to decide to be honest or not, we experience an ethical dissonance, which is very similar to the cognitive dissonance we experience when there is a conflict between to cognition or our cognition and our behavioral intentions. And whenever we have good excuses, we can reduce this tension, and this allows us to cheat and to lie. But it only allows us to cheat to lie to a certain degree, to a small extent. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot harder to justify. Now, I want to show you a little bit the task. We are using several tests, but this is one of the main tests that we are using in order to measure dishonesty. And this is the test that we use in the experiments that I want to show you today. So we call it the flexible dots test. And look at the screen. And I'm going to show you a square in the middle of the screen. And this square is divided by a horizontal line to two equal parts. In each part, you're going to see red dots. Your task is to tell me which side had more dots. Okay, so you're going to see this only for a couple of seconds. So focus and pay attention to the screen, and then tell me or think about which side had more dots. Okay, so participants do it for several tries, sometimes 60, sometimes 100, sometimes even more than that. And every time they see, in each trial they see the dots, they need to say which side, this is the instructions, which side had more dots. Now,
everyone on the chat is writing left, but they are not getting any sense for that, so it's easy.
Right. So exactly. So what we do in order to motivate people to cheat, we tell them, listen, your task is to tell us where there are more dots. However, you will not be compensated based on your performance. In some trials, if you will say there are more dots on the right, you will get 20 cents. If you say there are more dots on the left side, you will only get 2 cents. So this creates a motivation between telling the truth, which is what you were instructed to do, to say where there are more dots, and between gaining more by not following the rules, which is basically the definition of dishonesty. Now, people can make mistakes. We understand that, right? I mean, maybe I think there are more dots on the right side, even though they were more on the left, because in some trials, the task is harder because the difference between the number of dots on the right side and on the left side is small. So we understand that people can make some honest mistake. So in order to understand the extent of cheating, what we do is we divide the types of errors that people can make. So for example, the trial that you just saw, so everybody can see that there are more dots on the left side than on the right side, right? So if people choose more on the right, we call it beneficial error. Why? Because it's an error that will allow you to gain more money. In some trials, for example, as you can see here, there are more dots actually on the right and not on the left. So choosing the right answer will also get you more money. If in these types of trials, people select the left side, it means that they made a mistake. But this mistake is detrimental because it doesn't give them anything. It actually costs them money. So in order to understand the amount of cheating, what we do is we subtract the beneficial error minus the detrimental error. And this gives us a more accurate measure of what is the percentage of errors that people made that were in order to gain more money. Now, if all errors are honest, the difference between the beneficial and detrimental should be zero, right? Because my errors are equally divided between the two sides. But if I have much more errors to the high-paying side relative to the low-paying side, I should see a bigger difference. Yes, someone said in the chat. So, of course, the main idea behind motivating people to cheat is to have a personal interest. Gaining more money is one way in which we manipulate this idea of having a personal interest. We also do other things, as I will show you in a second, in one of the experiments that I want to share with you. Okay, so in the first experiment I want to present, we call it Pinocchio meets Robin Hood, because I want to test the effect of justifications on someone asked if the experiment is ethical. So we got the ethics approval. So hopefully it is. But this is another philosophical question that maybe if we'll have time at the end, we can discuss. So the first experiment I want to show you is about how justifications actually affect cheating behavior, and also how it affects the ethical dissonance that we talked about, how it affects my physiological arousal. So what we did, we used the dots task, but in this task, one second. So in this task, we had three conditions. In one condition, which is we call the pure altruistic condition, you could lie in order to get more money, or cheat in order to get more money, but every dollar that you earned was donated to a charity you chose before we started the experiment. So this was the pure altruistic. In a second condition, the money was divided 50-50 between the participant and the charity they selected before the experiment. And in the egocentric condition, people took all the money to themselves. So these three conditions manipulated the justifications. Okay, so this was the first phase of the experiment. But a participant chose a charity, played the dots test, and earned money. And depending on the condition, either donated everything, donated half, or kept all the earnings for themselves. After they completed the dots test, we were unfortunate to have one of our PhD students who was a chief polygraph examiner at the Israeli police. So they underwent a lie detection test. And in the test, we asked them, did you cheat in the dots test? And what we wanted to see is if there is any connection between the condition they had or the justification that they had and how likely they are to be detected in the polygraph test. So first of all, let me show you the behavioral results. And we can see here, just 1 second. Okay. So we can see here basically that people, right? People actually cheat more when they have justifications, right? The pure altruistic and the limited altruistic conditions, the cheating level is higher relative to the egocentric. And it's, it's not a surprising finding, but it's interesting to show it, experimentally, that when people have good excuses or good justification and, cheating in order to benefit a charity is considered something good. The mayor of Jerusalem, the former mayor of Jerusalem, Uri Lopolyansky, was found guilty of taking a bribe when he was the mayor of Jerusalem. But even the judge says that, every money that he took, he donated to Yad Sarah, which is a charity organization. And they say we can't, ignore this fact, and we cannot, take it under consideration when he was giving the sentence. So when people have good reasons to cheat, they do it. And one of the reasons they do it is because I can convince myself I'm not a cheater. I'm not a bad person. I'm actually a good person, because even though I sacrifice my moral values, I do it for a good cause. So this is behavioral. But let's see what happens in the polygraph test. And in the polygraph test, in terms of the egocentric condition, so there is, we show that the more you cheat, the more likely you are to be detected as a cheater by the examiner. So we see that the suspicious grade in a polygraph test, people are asked about whether they lied in the test or not. I'm not going to go into the method in length, but basically they have a suspicious grade, which is the higher the grade, the more likely the person cheated. And we can see here that there is a significant increase. And people cheat more, they're more likely to be detected and to marked as cheaters. This is in the egocentric condition, no justification. People chose to cheat in order to maximize personal gain. In the limited altruistic condition, we see a slight increase. It's not significant though, but most importantly, I think the most interesting finding we have, actually we have two interesting findings. One is that in the pure altruistic condition, when 100% of your earnings were donated to a charity you chose, meaning that you don't have any personal, at least, in terms of money, no personal gain, the more you cheat, the less likely you are to be detected. We have a question. If someone is cheating under the law, is it still considered cheating? Yes, yes, it is. But more philosophically, I think. But this is basically one explanation of why, people with high rank in the government allow themselves to lie and cheat and steal, because they feel they are entitled to do that. We're not going to go into politics too much, but it can explain oftentimes why people allow themselves to do things, like they say, under the law. So one interesting finding is that the more you cheat, the less likely you are to be detected. The suspicious grade is the likelihood that the person lied. This is an evaluation of the polygraph test. This is how much does the examiner thinks that the participant cheated. So the higher the grade, the more likely that the person cheated. And we can see in the straight line that when people cheat more, the grade increases. So which means that this is a valid grade. And this is what the police is using. It's not something that we invented. But when people have good excuse, a good justification, they cheat less. I'm sorry, they cheat more, but they are less likely to be detected. This is one interesting finding. Another interesting finding is the fact that people who had good justification and chose not to cheat or cheated only to a small extent felt worse than those who cheated more. So if I have a good excuse to cheat, for example, if I cheat in order to benefit charity, but I choose not to cheat because I don't want to sacrifice my moral values in order to benefit others, I feel less good about myself because I go against the norms of the society, because society suggests or basically it's acceptable to do good. And even though I have a small personal price, for example, sacrificing my moral values in order to help a charity, and I choose not to do it, I feel bad about myself. And this bad feeling is higher than the feeling that people have when they choose to lie and cheat and basically do something that is morally wrong.
Guy, I'm just jumping in to say that it's now almost 1 and we have something like 15 minutes, including
yes. Yeah, I don't have much time, and I will. So I'm just going to present quickly one more experiment. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how it relates to crisis and to Corona, for example, because imagine, keep that in mind. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but keep in mind that during the Corona, we find it easier to find justifications. And one of the things that we experience in the Corona is the importance of following instructions, especially in situations when there wasn't any external enforcement. So people were supposed to put themselves in self-isolation if they got back from out of the country, or if they were close to someone who was diagnosed as a Corona patient. But not all the times the government and the law enforcement agency could enforce this, and people had to do it by themselves. And the easier they can find justifications not to do it, the more likely they are not to follow the instructions and do the thing that is so important in order to maintain or contain the virus. But we will talk a little bit about the implications in time of crisis in general, in coronavirus in particular, in just a few minutes. I'm just going to show you another experiment that is very, I think, related, and it is about the question, is revenge blind or not? Or does revenge gives us a justification to cheat, and does it depends on how what I'm revenging? If I revenge someone who cheated me or someone who did something else, and can I cheat someone who hurt me but didn't cheat me? So when we talk about the fact that people can hurt another person, they can be unfair, they can be not nice, they can cheat us, they can hurt us in many different ways. And the question that we wanted to address in this experiment was, are we blind to the reason of retaliating? So if somebody just was unfair to me, do I feel that it's okay to cheat him because he was unfair? Or I can only cheat someone who cheated me, and I will be unfair to someone who treated me in an unfair manner. And so in order to manipulate unfairness, we did a ultimatum game. I'm not sure if you all know the ultimatum game, so I'm going to briefly explain. In this game, there are two players. One is the proposer. The proposer gets money from the experimenter. Let's say $10. Now he needs to divide it between himself and another participant. Now let's say that he wants to be fair, so he divides 50-50, $5 to himself and $5 to the other player. Or he can choose a less fair allocation. Let's say he gives himself $8 and he gives the other player $2. Now the other player needs to decide whether he rejects or accepts the offer. If he rejects the offer, no one gets anything. All the entire $10 go back to the experimenter. If the other player accepts the offer, they each get their allotted portion. So 5 and 5, 8 or 2, or whatever the allocation is. This is the ultimatum game. What we did, we played a specific version of the ultimatum game. We were only cared about not the proposer, but the second player, the player who needs to accept or reject. Participants were told that there is either $10 or $25 that need to be allocated. And we manipulated that so we could have conditions in which the other player is fair and honest, is fair and dishonest, unfair and honest, or unfair and dishonest. We don't have time, so I don't want to go into much details about this. And let's see, okay. And then after they did the ultimatum game, they played the dots task. And in this task, we told them, listen, everything that you earn is going to be taken away from the other player. So the other player had some money that he earned in this game. So basically, what we meant to say was that if you choose to cheat, you're cheating the other player. And the money that you earn goes out of his pocket. And what we wanted to see is the connection between cheating and whether people were treated dishonestly and unfairly. Now, in terms of the ultimatum game, we replicate previous findings. People reject unfair offers and accept fair offers. This is no surprise here. But what was more interesting was the cheating level. And the cheating level shows, we can see here two interesting things. First of all, if you see the difference between people who accepted an unfair offer that was either honest or dishonest. So this line shows that if the proposal was unfair but it was honest, then they cheated the other person much less than if it was unfair and also dishonest. Here we can see that if the offer was rejected, meaning that I already retaliated a person who was unfair to me, then we can see that, first of all, those who are fair and honest, we cheat them to the lowest extent because we can understand why, because they were fair and honest to us. But here we lose the difference between unfair and honest and unfair and dishonest, meaning that at least behaviorally, revenge is not completely blind. So I tend to cheat those who cheated me. I tend to be unfair to those who are unfair to me, but I cheat less those who are unfair, and I cheat more those who are dishonest. Also, we had the polygraph test, and we showed that in terms of physiological arousal, revenge is blind, because revenge was justified. And no matter whether I cheated someone who was unfair to me or cheated someone who was dishonest, the suspicious grade was lower if people cheated people who they thought were mistreated them, whether if it was unfair or dishonest. So these are the findings, and what are the implications in times of crisis, in times of Corona. And if you have any ideas or comments, so feel free to say. So first of all, think about the meaning of justifications in times of crisis. First of all, we have things like entitlement, right? Because if for some reason I feel like the government is mistreating us, or if we feel that the regulations are not completely just, I feel like I'm entitled to even the odds a little bit by lying and cheating a little bit more. So if I don't think that I need to self-quarantine myself, even though the government says I do. So I can justify myself not doing that, or I can justify not, following the instructions or staying at home or doing physical activity, even though I'm not allowed to do it, because I have good reasons to assume that even though I do it, I'm not a dishonest or immoral person. Also, the idea of revenge. Think about a company that needs, due to the financial crisis, due to the coronavirus, need to reduce 15% of all the salaries. Now, if the company explains it very good and with full transparency, people might be okay with it. But if they don't do it, then people will allow themselves to revenge or to get back at the company. And we have many demonstrations that companies that needed to reduce salaries in order to overcome a financial crisis, for example, experience higher levels of employee theft and other negative behaviors if they didn't explain themselves well enough, and if they didn't control the justifications that employees could have regarding the situations, and also the implications for following instructions, because it's easier for me to justify things that doesn't make sense to me. One good example today is that shopping malls are open, the schools are opening on Sunday, but the beach is still closed. Now, somebody who wants tomorrow, it's going to be a very hot day, and he wants to go to the beach, and he thinks about, should I follow the instructions of the government? And he thinks to himself, does the instructions make sense? And the answer is no. And so why should I? And if I do that, does it make me an immoral person? Probably not, at least in the eyes of people. Why? Because it doesn't make sense. Because other things that might be more dangerous are okay. So why not going to the beach? Or why not going to see my grandparents, even though it was not allowed, when you can go out and stand in line at IKEA with 5,000 people. So the main implication here for businesses and for management is that if we want to hinder dishonesty, if we want to curb down dishonest behavior, we need to make several things very clear. We need to create a situation that is as ambiguous, as less ambiguous as possible, because ambiguity increases my ability to justify my behavior. I need to be more transparent, and I need to be more clear. We have any what? We have one question. What is the relation between morality and sense? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yoram, you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes. Hello. You said that you tied or you implied that in the beach example, that it doesn't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then I may as well go to the beach, even though it's forbidden. So it's a matter of sense, but you tied it to morality. So I'm wondering if they are linked in some way.
Yes. So when people don't find the rules and the regulations reasonable, when it doesn't make sense to them, it gives them a good justification not to follow the instructions. Because when it doesn't make sense to me, it means that something is maybe arbitrary, something is not controlled by actual good thoughtful consideration. And in such a situation, it's easier for me to justify not following the rules, not doing what is right or what is expected for me, because it's very easy to say to myself, it doesn't make me an immoral or a bad person to go to the beach, because there is no risk in that. I'm not doing anything wrong. When I don't think that the rules and the law make sense, people don't really follow it, and they feel like it's okay to break the rule. Let's see, another question here. Are you drawing an equivalent between government orders and morality? Basically, again, as I said, we in behavioral ethics, we talk about practical thing. We don't talk about whether the rules that the government is forming are moral or immoral. We live in a society in which we need to follow the rules, and the rules are determined by our government, whether we like it or not, whether we think it's moral or immoral, philosophically, theoretically, but we need to follow the rules. We choose, and I don't know if you heard about the Greek philosopher Socrates. He was arrested, he was put in jail, and he was sentenced to death because they said that he's poisoning the mind of the youth. And his follower, they broke into jail. They wanted to set him free, and he said, I chose to live by the rules of this country, and I will die by the rules of this country. So whether I like the rules or not, these are the rules, and I need to follow the rules. I chose to live in this country, and I need to obey the rules. And if I choose not to do it, then at least in our eyes, it means that I'm not honest, I'm not moral, practically. And this is what we're focusing on. Whether people follow the rules, whether people do what they are expected to do, what they are required to do. And it could be the rules that set up by the government. It could be companies. Think about companies today that in order to open and to go back to their normal routine, they need to follow the instructions of the government. And if they don't do it, they can be closed and they can be fined with thousands of dollars. And so managers today need to understand not only how to bring all their employees back, how to make their employees follow the rules that were set by the government. Whether they make sense or not, whether they are moral or not, they need to follow the rules in order to stay open, in order not to be fined.
We have Talia, then Kovi, and Mayan, I think, if I'm getting the...
Okay.
My question was just answered, thank you.
Okay, so Kobe, it seems the rules are defined by society, yet breaking the rules is also defined as okay. If others would agree with your actions, how can we reconcile it? So this is a good question. Actually, this is a big problem because when the majority of people do something, then the rest will follow. And this is, in behavioral economics, we have a tool that is called social proof in order to encourage people to do the right thing. We tell them that the majority of people are doing it. And this is a big problem if the majority of people don't do the right thing. For example, in a park in the United States, there are, I don't remember the name of the park. I think it's in Colorado or something, and they have these stones that were formed by lava or something, and people take one stone as a souvenir all the time. Most of the people do that, and in order to try and fight this, the park administration hangs signs saying, "Don't do it, don't be like everybody else, and take home stones because there will be none left for others." And what happened was that it increases the amount of stones that were taken, because when people see that everybody is doing the wrong thing, then it becomes the norm. And this is one of the problems that I talked about at the beginning, why it's important to curb down this behavior when it's only small, because if we make it larger, if people are doing it more and more often, we create negative social norms that encourage people to not follow the rules.
Guy, if possible, do you mind if I just follow up on that?
Okay.
Just in terms of I think that most people aren't living in society at large. Most people are living within very small societal groups.
Yes.
Where everyone in your family and your friends might be going to the beach, where most people aren't going to the beach. Yes. And then in your moral system that you're exposed to, then you would go to the beach still.
Yes, actually, it's a very good distinction. And we have an ongoing project that was aimed to examine the norms of the group that you are living in. And what we did was we compared norms of entrepreneurs and psychologists. And what we found was that, dishonesty is not across the board. So entrepreneurs were more dishonest, but only in things that are related to entrepreneurship. Because there is a norm, in entrepreneurship, lean and all these kind of new theories today that you don't have to have a full working product in order to get money, in order to go to the market. And so in terms of, cutting corners in the entrepreneurial world, entrepreneurs were more dishonest than psychologists. But in a mundane, everyday situation, they were not more. In some situations, they were even less. suggesting that sometimes when I know that my profession is not exactly, encourages honest norms, in other situations, I become a little bit even more honest in order to to moral cleanse myself from situation in which I allow myself more to cut corners. So when we have subgroups, so people don't, as Kobe said, belong to society as a large, and in subgroups, they determine their own norms, and people will follow the norms of the subgroup more than the norms of the entire society. And this is something that we need to understand because it determines in what situation people will have better justification to not follow the rules and to act in dishonest ways. Okay, so we have some more questions.
Let's take just one or two more so we can have time for the break.
Okay, so one question, do you think the government is allowing itself to lie to citizens because of the crisis? Yes, I think so. I think they have good justification to do that. And so it's easier for them to do. And I think that one good thing that we have is the Supreme Court that kind of limits the amount of lying and cheating that the government can allow themselves to do in this time of crisis. But I do think that they exploit the situation. I don't think that, the ordinary man and the government and people from all walks of life, they work under the same principles. And so when we have good justification, and a time of crisis is a very good justification to bend the rules and to allow ourselves to do things that are not completely moral. And the last question, I guess, and if you have a question that I didn't have time to answer, feel free to contact me, to email me, and I'm happy to have a discussion about the things. So if the laws are illegitimate or unethical elsewhere, then something is probably wrong with the laws. Yes, I don't know if it's a question, but I think it's okay. Okay, one last question because it's very interesting. If the prime minister breaks his own rules, for example, when they said to keep a social distance from your family and then invite his son, what does that mean in related to this talk? It means that most people will not obey the rule, or they will be less likely because they have good excuse. The prime minister did it, so why can't I? Okay, thank you very much. Again, if you have any question, and I'm sorry I didn't have time to answer all the questions, feel free to email me or whatever, or to contact me in any other way. I'll be very happy to have a discussion, a deeper discussion, because our time was very limited, and naturally I can't present everything and I can't address all the things.